Oh, hi. Didn't see you come in. Whew, caught me off guard there, guys. Came to sew? Fantastic! You're in the right place. Today is a good twofer here at Old Spool Sewing Studio. I am going to show you how to make an adorable little pineapple and a super cute little flamingo to go along with it. My name is Julia. I am here at Old Spool Sewing Studio in beautiful Brielle, New Jersey, where I teach kids and adult classes in all sorts of sewing and crafts. Today we are going to go over how to make these guys. There are some pretty basic hand sewing stitches here, but the shapes that we are stitching together are not so basic. So hold on to your needles, grab your pins, and get your scissors ready because we are going to stitch up some super cute little felt stuffies. Let's talk about the materials that you're going to need for today's hand sewing project. First off, you're going to want wool or wool blend felt in an assortment of colors to make your pineapple and flamingo. Here I've got a bright pink for the flamingo's body, a darker pink, some white and black, as well as yellow and green for my pineapple. You can make your in whatever colors you want. This is your world and we're just living in it. Now, why wool blend or wool felt instead of plastic or polyester felt? Because this will one day biodegrade, while polyester felt will never biodegrade, and it's made of a bunch of plastic. So when you can, always buy wool or wool blend felt. Next, you're going to want to download the pattern off of my website for the flamingo and pineapple sewing patterns. You're going to see each piece has how many you have to cut, and make sure when you're printing it out that you print it at 100% or do not scale. If you fit to page, the pattern will end up being a little bit smaller, which isn't the worst, but if you accidentally scale 50%, your flamingo body is going to go from here to about here, and it'll be a little hard to work from. You're also going to want fabric scissors as well as paper scissors. Now, I am a little loony and I always have separate scissors for both paper and fabric because you want to keep your fabric scissors only for fabric so that they stay nice and sharp. You can see I even label mine. And then paper scissors can be used on paper and everything else. You'll want a hand sewing needle. Here it is mine on my little needle minder. I like to use number 5 embroidery needles. You can find a link in my description. You'll want embroidery floss or thread. This is 6-strand or stranded embroidery floss. A writing utensil of some sort. This is a friction pen right here, which I talk about all the time, but if you have a pencil or a Sharpie, does just as good. Extra helpful for this project is some form of glue because that'll help keep pieces together. You'll want pins or a safety pin so that you can hold your pieces together. And finally, you'll want some sort of stuffing if you want to make your projects a little dimensional. I always recommend not buying polyester stuffing because, again, it's plastic. I love buying corn fiber fill, and I've linked that in my description as well. Or you can chop up an old pillow, an old stuffed animal. I also love this stuff called shoddy from a company called Fabscrap, which you might see later in the video. It's recycled fabric, so anything that's not plastic. First things first, you're going to want to print out your pattern at 100% or actual size so that all the pieces are the correct size for this project. Grab your paper scissors and cut out on the line of all of your pattern pieces and try not to lose them. Now that you have your pieces all cut out, we're going to get to cutting our felts. If you take a look at most of the pattern pieces, except for the ones that were a little too small for me to write it, it tells you how many pieces you have to cut of each. So, starting with the pineapple, we have to cut 2 pieces of this oval. So I'm going to take my yellow felt, and if this was a larger piece, I would probably fold it in half. But here I have 2 pieces that are perfectly sized, and I'm going to layer them on top of each other. I'm going to take my pineapple pattern, put it directly in the center. You don't want it touching any of the edges. And if you have regular sewing pins, you're going to want to pin it in place. Now, I like to pin and cut when I'm cutting out patterns, but another option, if you don't want to pin and cut, is that you can pin or hold it down in place, grab your writing utensil, and trace the pattern onto the felt. Keep in mind that if you're tracing, you're going to want to trace onto both pieces or keep the pieces of felt pinned together so that you can cut 2 at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and pin all my pattern pieces, cut them all out, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll get to sewing. Now, the leg pieces are one of the trickier pieces to cut, and if you noticed, when I originally cut out my patterns, I left the negative space between the legs, and I'm going to continue to do so. I can't even really get my pin to stay in the center of my pattern, so I'm just going to be very careful as I go around and cut this piece out. I'm having trouble keeping the feet straight, so I'm going to put a pin in those too. Alright, I had to take that pin out in order to cut this last foot, so if you see, I'm using my hand to act as a pin and holding my pattern in place as I cut around. If I let go, my pattern piece can move, which will cause me to cut a weird shape. So, especially with the legs, take your time. And I'm going to continue to leave that negative space until I get to putting these legs into my flamingo. This piece is a little too small for me to put a pin in, and some of my other pieces were a little tricky too. But here I'm going to demonstrate how easy it is to hold your finger down and piece by piece trace out with a pencil or a marker. Grab my Sharpie because I want to make sure it's nice and bold so you can see it. I'm going to hold my piece down with one finger and gently trace the shape onto my felt. When you're done, you take your pattern off, and I didn't draw really dark because I want to be careful. You know, if you draw into the middle of your felt, you've kind of ruined it, so you'll have to flip it over and use the other side. And then once you have the little piece that you can trace, you can cut out, and you want to cut so that you don't see the marker anymore. So see how I cut off the marker on that part? I'm going to do that all the rest. I made a mistake. You need 2 of each of the beak pieces out of white and out of black. So here I am with the little bit of felt that I have left and one of my beak pieces cut out, and I'm going to use this as my pattern piece to cut the other. And then I'm going to do the same with the black beak piece. Now that you have all of your pieces cut out, we're going to want to assemble our flamingo first. Grab your wing pieces and the body pieces and lay them flat on a table like I have them. We're going to want opposites of these guys so that we have a front and a back of our flamingo. So take one of the flamingo bodies and flip it so it is opposite the other, and do the same thing with the wing. Now what we're going to want to do is take each wing piece and place it onto the flamingo. So I actually want that one to go that way and that one to go that way. You have the option here, if you'd like, to glue these in place. I would recommend the gel glue or fabric tack glue, which is really, really good for projects like this. But be warned, this stuff dries very, very hard, and you won't be able to get a needle through if you wanted to use this glue. I am a sewing teacher, so naturally, I'm gonna sew these on. I'm gonna grab my hand sewing needle and the embroidery floss I want to use to stitch it on. You can use whatever color you want. Red's what I have on hand. And embroidery floss is what we call stranded, because if you look, and if I tease the end of this apart, you'll see that there's all different strands on this piece of floss. So I am going to cut a piece that is as long as my arm. And I'm going to pull apart so I get 3 strands and 3 strands, or 2, 2, and 2. There are 6 strands, so you want to separate them. This not only makes it easier for us to thread our needle, but we're going to have a lot more thread this way. think every time you split it in half, you double the amount of yarn you have. So I'm going to grab the two strands, and because it's lightly plied together, you can see as I pull, the whole thing twists. So just gently pull them apart so that nothing gets caught. And if you start to get caught, you kind of need the third hand. Once you have your embroidery floss split into two pieces, so I've got 3 strands here, you're going to want to grab your needle and thread your needle and tie a knot in one end of your thread. Why do I like to tie a knot in only one end of my thread, therefore leaving another part of my thread hanging free? This way allows me to fix mistakes. If I took both ends of my thread and tied them together into a knot, I'd have a nice thick piece of embroidery floss, but I would have no way of fixing my mistakes if I make any. I'm going to grab one of the flamingos, take one of my pins, and I'm going to pin the wing in place just to hold it where I want it to be while I sew it together. And what we're going to do is just a little running stitch right around the outside of the wing. You can do a bunch of different types of stitches, but a running stitch is one of the easiest. Now, taking your needle, you're going to want to come from behind. So do you see how I'm poking my needle from this side, which is the back side, through to the front side? This is so that the knot that I tied at the end of my thread is at the back side of my pattern piece. You're going to want to pull tight. I know I have a nice long tail there. I'll trim it at the end. And now that we're on the top half, I'm going to start stitching this direction to go all the way around. From the top, you go back in the top and you poke straight through both layers. Grab the thread from the bottom or the needle from the bottom, pull tight, and you can see where I came out to where I went in creates a little stitch. Then I'm going to want to move over a little bit. And it's a good challenge to try and keep your stitches nice and even at this time. So you can see I'm coming up right over here, pull tight, and make another stitch. So what you want to think about when you're making a running stitch is it's like a dolphin jumping up out of the water and then diving back down. I'm under the water right now because I'm on the back side, so I'm going to jump up out of the water and dive back down into the water from the front. And you'll go and do this all the way around your wing. When you get enough stitches in to hold the wing piece in place, you can always take that pin out if it starts to get in your way. Oh no, I made a mistake. Instead of jumping up and down, what I did here was I came out from the back and I took my thread around and I went through the front. So I have this weird little piece of thread that is stuck around the outside of my project. How do I fix that? Well, if you did what I said and you only knotted one side of the needle, you're going to want to pull the thread out of your needle. So you have to unthread your needle, take your needle, and pick out that last stitch. And see, I was able to fix it. If I didn't do that, there's really no way that you can fix it. So I really highly recommend that you thread your needle and only tie a knot on one end of the thread. I'm going to rethread my needle, finish sewing this, and then do the same for my other flamingo. I'll meet you back here when both the wings are stitched on. Hey, they kind of look like flamingos, don't they? Or maybe a little bit more like two swans kissing. Anyway, now what you're going to do for me is grab your 2 white beak pieces and place them on either nose of your project. So if you look, their beaks kind of point down. Oh, my beaks are a little uneven, so I'm going to fix that up. But then I recommend that you grab the glue that you have handy, and you're going to put a little dab of glue right where the white and the weird like extension of the flamingo's face overlap. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue right here and place my piece down on top of that. This is to hold the white pieces in place while we stitch all the way around the outside of our flamingo pieces. Now at this point, if you want your flamingo to have eyes, I suggest you get a little bit of black embroidery floss and thread up your needle so I can show you how we would do a French knot. Alternative, you can always put a little bit of black thread on your needle and stitch a little circle on either side of the flamingo's face, but I think it would be really fun to show you how to make a French knot. So I'm gonna go thread up my needle and I'll be right back. So I've got my black embroidery floss threaded up on my needle, and I'm gonna make a little French knot to be the eye of my flamingo. Now, a French knot is a little bit more of a complicated hand sewing and embroidery technique, so I totally recommend that you grab a piece of scrap felt or scrap fabric and practice this a few times before you move on to your flamingo. But hey, if you make a mistake, we can always fix it, right? I'm gonna grab one of the pieces, and right where I wanna make the flamingo's eye, I'm gonna come up from behind. So remember, I'm poking my needle up towards the camera through to the front of my fabric. Now, it's really helpful if you put your project down on the table for this part because you kind of need a third hand. You're going to take the needle, bring it down close to your project, and grab the working thread that's coming out of your flamingo. I'm going to take the working thread and wrap it 3 times, 1, 2, 3, around my needle, and keep holding on to that thread while you take the needle and place it back into the felt, pretty much right next to or right into the same hole that you came out of. And the trick here is to use your non-dominant hand to hold that thread. So see how I'm kind of pinching it with my left hand? I'm gonna grab the needle from behind and pull tight. And as you come, see how I still haven't let go? You'll pull tight and it'll make a little knot. Looks pretty cute, right? So I'm gonna tie a knot, and then I'm gonna do the same thing on this guy. All right, our next step is going to be to start sewing our flamingo pieces together. So thread up whatever color you would like to stitch around the exterior of the flamingo with, and I'll meet you back here. I'm going to teach you a simple whip stitch to put the flamingo bodies together. And at this point, you're going to want to grab your legs and keep them close by, because as we sew around the body, we're going to sew the legs in at the bottom. Now, if you're like me and you haven't cut out that negative space yet, you can go ahead and try and do that. You're going to want to fold the legs in half gently where you want the hole and snip into them. Or alternatively, you could just leave them like this, because I actually think they'll look pretty good that way too. You can kind of get an idea of it. But I'm going to go ahead and try and, oop, I'm attached, cut my little bit. Remember, you can't add more, but it's pretty easy to keep taking away more. So I'm just going to snip up to there, snip down to there, do a little bit across. There we go. That looks pretty good. So we're going to keep that handy while we start sewing our flamingo pieces together. You're going to want to take one of your flamingos, flip him over, and take the other guy, place them right on top so that the wrong sides or the insides of your flamingos are touching. Now, if you did a good job cutting, they should be pretty much the same size. If they're not, you can try and trim them up a little bit, but mine are a little uneven, and I'm going to leave that right now because there's really no reason to get that nitpicky about stuff. Because we're going to sew them together, I suggest you grab a pin and put a pin or two through the body and the head. But you're going to have to do a lot of the controlling in this project because Flamingo's got a long, skinny neck. We're going to grab our needle and we're going to start doing our whip stitch right down here. Now, if you think, we're going to put the legs right here. There you go. You can see what it's kind of going to look like when they're. So this is where I want my legs to go. I'm going to start a little bit further away from that, right over here, and I'm going to work my way this way around my flamingo. When I get back to the legs, I'm going to stitch through there with more of a running stitch as opposed to the whip stitch that we're going to do around the body. Now, you're going to grab your flamingo, and starting towards the front here, you're going to go in between the two layers and poke through to the back. So see how I'm going through the back layer, close to the edge, so that we don't see the knot. Put your layers back together. I've turned my flamingo upside down because I'm going to work that direction because I'm right-handed. And I'm going to poke front to back close to where I came out. So here's where I came out. I just moved over a teeny bit. Front to back, pull tight. And as opposed to the running stitch before, the whip stitch is supposed to have a little piece of thread that wraps around the edge. So again, you're gonna move over a teeny bit. If you can see, my stitches are about 1/4 of an inch apart. So if you're unsure, grab a ruler and pull tight. Whoop, I got caught. And I'm gonna do this all the way around my flamingo until I get to the other side of where I want the legs to be. So I'm gonna kind of get around this tail and stop right here. Now, as you're sewing, sometimes you might make mistakes. Remember, you can always unthread your needle because you have a loose end and undo your stitches. And you also might start to get a little low on thread because this is a pretty long distance and this stitch uses up a lot of thread. When you get down to about a hand's length of thread left, so that's about from my fingertips to the bottom of my hand, you're going to want to tie a knot. So remember, our knots are halfway through, take the working thread, wrap it around your needle, and pull the needle the rest of the way out. But I'm going to keep sewing until I get low on thread. Oops, I pulled my flamingo's beak off. It's probably because I didn't stitch it in place and I only used some Elmer's glue. So I'm gonna stick that back on there. And luckily, when I come around and stitch them together, it's gonna hold everything in place. As you come up to the beak, you're going to want to make sure that the 2 beak pieces are evenly aligned and make sure that you stitch through all of the layers to hold the beak pieces on. So by stitching through the white, through the pink, and coming back out on the white, I know that my beaks aren't going to move, and I've sewn them together. Now, I'm getting low on thread, but if you look, this is where the other end of my thread is. So I'm actually just gonna take the needle and pull the needle a little bit to make the tail a little bit shorter, and now I can sew a little bit longer. Here is that hand's length of thread that I was talking about. So I'm gonna tie a knot here, halfway through, grab my working yarn, twist it around my needle and pull, and then I'm gonna get a new piece of thread and start right where I left off. There's my knot. I'll meet you back here once I finish stitching all the way down to right before where the legs would be. Keep in mind you want to leave about 1 inch. If you put your thumb down, that's the amount of space that you want to leave because that's the amount of space that we need for our legs. Here I am at the bottom of my flamingo and I have about 2 fingers of a distance left, or a thumb, or 2 thumbs actually, like I said before, so that I can get my legs in. But now at this point you might want to make the body of your flamingo a little bit fluffier and a little bit more substantial. You by no means are going to need this amount of fluff, but you're going to want to break off a little bit and stuff it into the flamingo body. You'll learn really quickly if you left any holes because you'll have fluff starting to stick out. But see, this is even too much. Undo the amount of fluff I need. And you're going to want to stuff it into the body. Now, if you notice, unfortunately, our flamingo's head's a little too skinny for us to get fluff all the way up in here. But I think that that's okay. Kind of looks cute. He's got a chubby little body and a skinny little head. Now that I've got my fluff in there and I've stuffed it in with my finger and I'm evenly distributed, try not to overstuff because it'll make it trickier to hand sew clothes. I'm going to grab my legs and I'm going to stick them right in the middle and inside a little bit. See how I kind of just stuck it in a little bit? And I'm gonna flip them over and I'm gonna hold my legs in place. Now, if you're having a hard time holding, you can always grab pins and put a pin. See how I'm going through all the layers at the legs and pinning back out to hold the legs in place? You'll want to pin them so that it stays in place. And I'm going to continue whip stitching until I get up to my legs. And then I'm going to do a few little running stitches like we did before here to go right through all the layers of the legs and the flamingo's body. All right, here I am. I'm about to do my running stitches. Now, where's my thread? It's coming out the back side here. So just like we did before, I'm gonna stick through all my layers from that side and make sure I pierce those legs. So you see how close I am to the edge? Pull tight. I'm gonna make little stitches here so I know that I catch my legs. So up, down, up through all my layers. If you want, you can always do a back stitch, which is I'll go in this hole instead of continuing to go forward. So I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna go in this hole and I've created a back stitch. So I know that my flamingo's legs are really sturdy on there. I'm gonna come back up. And when you're at the other side of the legs like I am, you can go back to doing your whip stitch. So I'm gonna poke through, last running stitch, bring it around the front and do my last few whip stitches front to back, trying not to get the legs tangled. All right, there I am. I'm gonna tie a knot and we're done sewing our flamingo together. Now, if at this point you have your knot, which I do right down here, but you wanna hide the tails of your threads because you don't wanna have a little piece, take your needle and stick it between the layers of felt. So see, I'm going right into the center of the layers, and then you can come out on either side, but you wanna come out kind of far away. So see where I'm poking in and coming out? You can't see it on this side, but you can see it on this side. I'm gonna pull my needle, and I can cut my thread right there up against the felt. And if you give it a little bit of a tug, it helps, and look, it disappears. And now I don't have any thread tails. And I can take this guy out. Oh my gosh, how cute is that? So now what you're gonna wanna do is grab your beak piece, and you should have 2 of these black beak pieces. If you don't, make sure you cut a second. And you're actually gonna cut it about in half. So see how I'm putting my scissors right here? You're gonna cut and do it at a little bit of an angle and cut this extra stuff off, because a flamingo's beak actually isn't all white or all black, it's half and half. And you're gonna grab your piece, and see I'm gonna put it right on the end there, like that. Grab my other piece, you're gonna go on the other side. And I actually think I'm gonna glue these guys in place instead of sewing them, because I think it'll be a lot easier. You're more than welcome to sew them. You do a normal whip stitch and make sure you go through all the layers. But there are so many layers here, I think it'll be a lot easier just to glue them. So I'm gonna grab my Elmer's gel glue, do a little dab on the inside of either piece. Stick it right on the end. And there you go. There's your super cute little flamingo. Now, if you wanted to turn him into maybe a little ornament or a keychain, you're gonna grab your keychain and we'll whip stitch it to the top of our flamingo so it has somewhere to go. I love turning my little felt stuffies into keychains because that means that I get to show them off to more people when they're attached to my keys. So I always have a whole bunch of these split rings hanging around. You can always sacrifice an old keychain that you don't like as much to make a new one. So all I'm gonna do is on one side, I'm gonna lay the ring so it kind of matches the top of my flamingo's head, and I'm going to try and go in between the layers with my needle and come out on one side. So I'm going to poke through one layer from the middle to the outside so I hide the knot in my thread. And you can do this with any color, and you can see my knot's kind of sticking out the top, so I'm going to use my needle to poke it in there. But it'll also kind of disappear as we sew this on. Now, all you're gonna do is a few nice strong whip stitches through the top of your flamingo and through the ring. So I've come from the top, you can see how the thread's coming wrapping around, and I'm gonna go right through the middle of the ring. And when you do this, that creates a stitch that holds the ring in place. So again, I'm out here, I'm gonna bring my thread towards me, poke through right next to where I went. We're not trying to go very far apart, just a few stitches to hold this in place. I'm gonna do, let's say I'll do 5 just to be extra strong. Going in the same spot every time pretty much. You can hide your thread if you want, and that's how I've made it into a keychain. Oh, it seems like my flamingo's nose is coming apart. Maybe you should wait till the end to glue it on, because if this happens to you, it's kind of a bummer. That's also why I really like and highly recommend having some of this fabric tack glue. It's harder to squeeze and it takes a while to come out, but oh man, does this stuff hold stuff together, as opposed to Elmer's glue, which can take a really long time to dry and isn't always the best when it comes to felt and fabric. Fabric tack is highly, highly recommended. See, it's Beacon Fabric Tack. You can find it at any craft store. So I'm gonna fix my flamingo and then let's get to sewing this one. I'm excited about that. All right, Flamingo, you can move aside. Now we're gonna grab the pieces that we need for our pineapple, the 2 crowns and the 2 egg-shaped yellow pieces, or whatever color you cut them out of. Now we're not gonna necessarily need our crown pieces just yet, unless you wanna skip the step that I'm about to do and get right to sewing your pineapple together. But I like to take a little bit more of an artistic approach, and I'm going to grab a contrasting thread, be it orange or brown or whatever color, and I'm gonna stitch the texture of the pineapple onto these 2 pieces using running stitches. So I'm gonna thread up my needle with a little bit of orange thread, and we're gonna talk about how we can quickly sew the texture on to our pineapple pieces. This is gonna take a little bit of time, and you're welcome to skip it. Another solution is always to grab a brown marker or pen and gently draw your lines. But remember, when you write with pen or marker, that's not gonna come out. When you use stitches, you can always take those out. So just be careful if you go the route of drawing this on, or you can leave it blank, but I like the idea of giving it a little bit of texture. So we're gonna grab one of our pieces, and you're gonna thread up your needle with whatever contrast color that you've chosen, and you're gonna tie a knot in one end, which I totally forgot to do. And starting towards the top, you're gonna imagine that we're gonna do a series of lines across the surface, and we're gonna go diagonal this way, and then we're gonna do some diagonal lines this direction. So we're gonna start right up here, and I'm actually gonna come up from the back, and we're gonna do a series of running stitches, and we're gonna keep them quite close together while we do this. So I'm gonna go in, come right back out, which this is a very quick way of doing a bunch of running stitches. If you go in and out and then pull tight, you'll be back on the top and have created a little stitch. And I'm gonna make another little stitch in and out. This also helps you sew a much straighter line. In and out. And when we get to the end, we're gonna make sure that our needle goes to the back of our piece of felt so that we can travel to the next line. So there's one line. I'm on the back side of my fabric, so I'm gonna come up a little, maybe that far away, and I'm gonna draw a line going this direction. So it's actually easier if I turn it around. Pull tight. Now, make sure while you're doing this, you don't pull so tight that your pieces start to pucker like that. If they do, catch yourself and gently pull it out. You don't wanna make your pineapple piece all puckered up. So I'm gonna go in and out, making sure I keep my stitches pretty close together. In and out. Okay, Mr. Flamingo, you're done. Let's move on to our pineapple. So grab all 4 of the pineapple pieces that you need to make your pineapple. But actually, we're not really gonna need the 2 crown pieces just yet, because we're gonna take some time and add a little bit of texture to our pineapple pieces. What you're gonna wanna do is get a contrasting thread to the yellow. So I'm gonna use orange, but brown works well, or a darker yellow, or anything really, because we're gonna do a series of running stitches across the surface of our pineapple piece in order to mimic the surface texture of an actual pineapple. So this is gonna take a little bit of time, and you're welcome to skip it. Another solution is always to grab a brown marker or pen and gently draw your lines. But remember, when you write with pen or marker, that's not gonna come out. When you use stitches, you can always take those out. So just be careful if you go the route of drawing this on, or you can leave it blank, but I like the idea of giving it a little bit of texture. So we're gonna grab one of our pieces, and you're gonna thread up your needle with whatever contrast color that you've chosen, and you're gonna tie a knot in one end, which I totally forgot to do. And starting towards the top, you're gonna imagine that we're gonna do a series of lines across the surface, and we're gonna go diagonal this way, and then we're gonna do some diagonal lines this direction. So we're gonna start right up here, and I'm actually gonna come up from the back, and we're gonna do a series of running stitches, and we're gonna keep them quite close together while we do this. So I'm gonna go in, come right back out, which this is a very quick way of doing a bunch of running stitches. If you go in and out and then pull tight, you'll be back on the top and have created a little stitch. Then I'm gonna make another little stitch in and out. This also helps you sew a much straighter line. In and out. And when we get to the end, we're gonna make sure that our needle goes to the back of our piece of felt so that we can travel to the next line. So there's one line. I'm on the back side of my fabric, so I'm gonna come up a little, maybe that far away, and I'm gonna draw a line going this direction. So it's actually easier if I turn it around. Pull tight. Now, make sure while you're doing this, you don't pull so tight that your pieces start to pucker like that. If they do, catch yourself and gently pull it out. You don't wanna make your pineapple piece all puckered up. So I'm gonna go in and out, making sure I keep my stitches pretty close together. In and out. I'm getting a little messy. What's happening here? I get a knot. Did I lose a piece? I think I lost a piece of thread. All right, well, I got a knot. Let's see if I can pull it through. I can. Oh, thank goodness. So I'm going to finish this line, and then I'm going to make sure I don't have a knot anymore in my piece. But I think we're looking okay. Come on, thread, don't be so annoying. Now remember, like I said before, at the end of this row, we're also going to make sure that we come through to the back. So there are my lines. Remember, we don't have to be too perfect. You just want to get some texture. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this side, and then I'm going to work my way up diagonally in the opposite direction. All right, I've pretty much made it down, and it doesn't really look like much now, but that's okay. So now I'm going to come over here. I've got a good amount of thread that I can keep stitching. And now I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to go up the opposite direction. So I came out here, came up here, and I'm going to go in this direction now. So to stitch together my crown pieces, I'm going to take them together and put a pin in the middle. And I'm going to do the same stitch we did before to put together our flamingo. I'm going to do a whip stitch. So taking my needle, we're going to leave this little section below my needle, this part right here, open so that we can stuff the little top of our crown. And because this is ultimately going to get sewn over when we sew together our pineapple pieces. So I'm going to start a little bit further up, if you can see, from the inside out so that you don't see my knot, just like before, and front to back through both layers, all the way around. This is going to take me a second, so why don't you check back once I've got this sewn up together and I've stopped right about opposite this stitch over here, all right? So I just finished stitching around my pineapple, and as you can see, nice and messy. Wasn't that a deceivingly tricky sew? That's why I like this project. It really challenges you to work your way all the way around all those little points. Now, take a second, make sure you've tied a knot and you're not still at the beginning, and make sure that you don't have any major holes around the edge, because if you have a hole, stuffing is gonna find its way out of it. Now, we're not gonna need a whole lot of stuffing to stuff this little guy, so I'm probably barely gonna even get this much in there. And we left a hole in the bottom, so open it up with your finger and get stuffing in there. And you're gonna have to do it in tiny little bits at a time. Again, don't overstuff because it'll be hard to close it and it just kind of looks funny. So we'll get a little bit of stuffing in there. There we go. Oh, look at the little pineapple crown finger puppet. All right, so here's my crown. Now I'm gonna stick it in the top of my pineapple just like that. And I am going to put a pin through it. And this is going to be really similar to how we sewed the legs of the flamingo on. We're going to start down here and we're going to work our way all the way around. And when we leave a hole in the bottom, that's going to be where we can stuff the stuffing in. So that pin holding the crown on, double check, give it a little tug, make sure it's in there, maybe stick another pin right in the middle. And then you're going to want to thread up your needle with whatever color you plan on stitching around the pineapple with. For me, it's going to be the same orangey color that I used to stitch the texture. And you're going to start right about down here and work your whip stitch around your pineapple. Now, here you also have the option, if you want to go a little bit more challenging, if this wasn't challenging enough for you, you can do a blanket stitch. And if you look, I have a few different videos for hand sewing projects. I've made a donut, I've made a cactus, and in the donut project, I go over how to do a blanket stitch. So make sure you check that video out if you're really liking these hand sewing projects. All right, so I'm going to get my needle ready and I will get started. Just like we have every other time, I've got my needle threaded and a knot only tied in one end. I'm going to grab my pineapple and starting at the bottom, remember we're going to leave about a 2-finger or thumb space at the bottom. I'm going to look to the inside of my project. So I've folded back the top layer and I'm going to go through close to the edge, just one layer from the inside to the outside. And that's going to help hide my hole, or hide my knot. Not my hole. Hole's going to be noticeable. And I'm going to whip stitch all the way up until I get to the pineapple's crown. Remember that you have to stop if your thread gets short, because if your thread gets short, you're not going to be able to tie a knot. So I'm here with my whip stitch just at one side of the crown, and now I'm going to switch to a running stitch or a back stitch, which let's go over back stitch this time. My thread's in the back, so I'm going to come through all the layers, and if you can see where I'm putting my needle, I know I'm going through the green of the crown. That's the most important part of this. You want to make sure that you're securing the crown into your pineapple. Now I'm on the front part, so I am going to make a small stitch, again making sure I go through all my layers. Oop, in the back here I'm just missing my yellow, so I'm going to turn my needle a little bit and pull tight. Now to create a back stitch, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit just like I would if I was doing a running stitch. So let me make sure I'm going through all my layers, which then the pin might be in your way, which mine is right now, so I'm gonna move it out of my way and use my fingers to hold my crown in place. Oh, so much better. And I'm gonna come ahead. You can see I have a really big gap between where I went in and where I came out. I'm going to go back into the last hole to fill in that space between those stitches. So I have more of a straight line now. That's the stitch I just created. So again, I'm going to skip a little bit of forward just like we would in a running stitch. Pull tight. And instead of going forward, I'm going to go back into this hole, making sure I'm going through all my layers and pulling tight. And now I know that my crown is definitely secure. Get one more stitch in there. Now I'm going to come around to the front and whip stitch until I get down to the bottom again. So I'll meet you there. Here I am at the bottom, and if you can see, I've left a little space here and I've left my needle threaded just like I did when we did the flamingo, and I'm going to stuff my pineapple. So I'm going to grab my fluff, I'm going to break it up a little bit so it's nice and fluffy, and bit by bit I'm going to stuff my pineapple. Again, you can totally leave your pineapple unstuffed, but you know, it would be worthwhile if you stuffed the crown to also stuff the pineapple. And remember, we want to make sure that we don't have any major holes, because it will be a real bummer if our fluff comes bursting out. I've got my fluff in there. I'd say that that is adequately stuffed, and I'm going to whip stitch it close and tie a knot. Oop, oh, I just finished with just enough thread. I actually started sewing with 2 layers for a second, but I'm gonna have to leave it. So remember to tie a knot halfway through, wrap your thread, pull tight. If you wanna hide the tail, stick it to the inside, come out maybe an inch away, pull tight. And when you give it a little snip close to the fabric, careful not to cut your fabric, there is our pineapple. Pretty darn cute. I'd say they make an awesome pair, but I kind of want to do just a little bit extra to give my pineapple some personality. Hold tight. So my flamingo is pretty cute and cool, but my pineapple needed a little bit of love. So I gave him sunglasses. I had a little bit of extra blue felt, and this black felt was from when we sewed and cut these pieces out of our flamingo. So you could have even given them pink ones, because you should have some extra pink left over as well. And I challenged you to try and do this on your own without a pattern. If you look, I've got a little straight piece of felt, little straight piece of felt, little straight piece of felt, 2 hearts and 2 smaller hearts. Now the hearts are tricky, so don't get too crazy about making them perfect. If you can tell, this one's a little cattywampus, this one's not really quite a heart, but when you put them together, they're pretty darn cute. Now at this point, if you want to, you can grab another split ring and sew it onto your pineapple up at the top here, just like we did with our flamingo. But if you don't want to, he looks just as adorable the way he is. Okay, Mr. Pineapple, I think the only thing to do now is to go to the beach and soak up some sun. And I think Mr. Flamingo should come with us. Yes, I am losing my mind and talking to Phil. So anyway, I hope that you had a good time stitching up this project today. Deceivingly difficult for a beginner hand sewing project, right? It was all those spiky pieces and all those weird curves. But if you had an issue, you know that you can comment below and I will absolutely get back to you. You can also reach me Instagram, Facebook, or by email, and I'm always happy to chat sewing. If you'd like, I really would love it if you subscribe to my channel. I have so many more hand sewing and machine sewing projects if that's your thing. And like this video if you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, my name is Julia. I am coming at you from the Jersey Shore here at Old Spool Sewing Studio in beautiful Brielle, New Jersey. And happy stitching!